Now, I thought that I learned two things with this. One,
I'm laughing because I gave it to my husband because he is on one side or other of this. And I said, "Did you read it?" And he said, "I got bogged down."
well, the second thing I learned was this Bible study isn't always interested in homework.
Yeah. Don't forget.
Well, yeah.
These words are unreal.
Yes.
Moses had to say that when he wanted to
This is quite.
So I thought we'd just
Yeah, let's
talk about what Pastor Jervell, is trying to say. Within the church, if we look at the church as a trunk, we have a lot of offsprings. You know, the Anglicans broke away, and then the Methodists broke away from us, and then the Free Methodists broke away from them, and so, you know, there was a lot of division. The original stalk of the tree was Roman Catholic Church, but, you know, Luther kind of took care of that. And then there were people whose faith was based on dogma. There are a group of people we call the Anabaptists. That's not anti, but the Anabaptists, who don't believe children should be baptized. You need to be baptized at an age of reason and understanding. If that's really the test you have to have, a lot of us wouldn't have been baptized, because I don't think I've reached the age of reason yet. Because my wife tells me oftentimes I'm unreasonable. But what Jervell is trying to say, at least as I read it, during Paul's time, you had the Jews and you had the Gentiles, and then you had Gentiles who were converted, but they weren't converted to Judaism. Like a lot of Jews, they became Jewish Christians. And I know for years, you know, I've always said, as a lot of New Testament scholars have written, Matthew was written for Jewish Christians. And Mark was written for Gentiles. And John was written for people who were kind of philosophic, you know, wisdom.
You think that was a plan?
Oh, really?
Or do you think
That's
that
interesting.
happened because that was the background of the writer?
Right. You know, and so, and we see in a lot of those stories, like in Matthew at the feedings, when they collected the baskets of bread, they collected 7 or 12 baskets of bread, and the word for basket was the Hebrew word for Baptist, or basket. And there were 12 baskets, one for each tribe. When Luke tells the story, he uses the Greek term for basket, and they collect 7 baskets for the 7 corners of the world. So, you know, as we look at these Gospels, you can see where there's really a lot of connection between Judaism, Gentilism, and then a conglomerate. Well, this author is saying that during Paul's time, and Paul is writing 3rd generation, you know, after the second fall of the temple. And, you know, he's saying there is not a new separate group, that the Jews who became Christians and the Gentiles who became Christians stem from the Jewish history. And he's making the case for there was no division of the branch. There's no tree over here called Judaism and a tree over here called Christianity. That Christianity was a branch off of that. And it kind of makes sense, because as we've read in the book of Acts, whenever Paul gets to town, where's the first place he goes?
Synagogue.
He goes to a synagogue and preaches. And even back to the question that we had earlier in the book of Acts, why did he take that poor young man and make him get circumcised? Because
Timothy.
Timothy, yeah. And we don't hear much from Timothy for a few chapters because
He's healing up.
he's ticked off.
And rightfully so.
Yeah. So what we have is Paul being expressed in Luke's terms as a Jew. I mean, but he's a Jew that's trying to straighten out the faith. And so when we talk about it, we're Judeo-Christian, we really do have strong roots to the Jews.
I always usually say Judeo-Christian.
Yes.
They don't say Christian.
Yes. I mean, the promise that was given to the Jews is the same promise that was given to the Gentiles who joined. And a lot of the Gentiles who joined, they started going to temple. Now, they didn't do all the Jewish things like circumcision. But, you know, Paul still expresses, and in 1 Corinthians, he talks about, you know, food. You know, what should you eat, what shouldn't you eat? And remember that wonderful explanation where people say, if I go to somebody's house and they're doing a sacrifice, should I eat the sacrifice? And Paul starts off by saying, well, you don't want to offend your friends. And he ends up by saying, well, maybe you shouldn't go at all.
Yeah.
You know, that's letting them down easy.
I never thought about Paul coming in. It was always in the synagogue, as his custom was, their custom. He was always there. I never thought about that because he was called by God to be an apostle to the Gentiles. So either he went into the, like you church to straighten them out, so to speak, and maybe get the lay of the land because he's going to go out here and talk to some others, find out. I don't know. I never thought about that. Thank you.
So, you know,
Well, what is the deal that the Jews, all the boys are 8 years old when they get circumcised? Why?
Not 8 years, it's 8 days.
8 days.
Oh, 8 days.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
If it was 8 years, you'd have a hard time catching them.
Okay, I didn't.
You're going to do what? Like hell.
I didn't catch the days. I was thinking. I
Yeah.
kept thinking,
That
why
was
why do they wait so long? I can see 8
See,
days.
as Jervell writes in here, what do we actually mean when talking about Israel? As we know, this question is not solved even today. You know, we're not sure what our relationship is. So as for Matthew, Israel has been replaced by another people. Paul grants Israel as the people of God a general amnesty, since the whole of Israel, after a temporary rejection, shall be saved at the end of times. The Gospel of John shows that throughout the history of Israel, there were always two groups among the people. I mean, if you look at the history of Israel, there was always somebody splitting off. I'm trying to think. I saw a meme. The Jewish people were going to go to jail, but they couldn't make bail. B-A-A-L.
Oh,
Oh my God.
But see, you know, when they were over in Jewish territory, where bail was a big deal, there were a lot of Jews that consider themselves good Jews, but they still worship Baal. You know, you go to their house and somewhere in the closet upstairs, maybe in the attic, there'll be a little shrine to Baal.
A duality.
Yeah, well, they're covering their bets.
We were in Africa, and I heard a black man that was one of our sponsors when we were down there for a month. He could just pray heaven down. Oh, so eloquent. And then the rest of the story was he was voodoo.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, how do you walk that wire and have
Yeah.
such good prayers? I do not know. And he put a contract out on the evangelist's life.
Yeah.
And that's a long story too. I thought, man, that's duality.
But see, we even today live in that duality. You know, we say we worship God, but if you look at our lives, and under the cover of darkness, under the bed sheets, we might admit, well, you know, I kind of like money. I kind of like money. And so, you know, it really is difficult to commit yourself 100% to the God Yahweh. It's no different today than it was in Paul's time, that it was in David's time, that it was in Abraham's time. And when they got conquered, why did the Jews get conquered? Because God got a little upset with them. And, you know, and he's trying. He's always calling them back. You know, you'll punish us for a little bit, but you'll bring us back. That's why I like that passage from Jeremiah. I will write my law on their hearts. If you really look at your heart, and you can tell how good a Jewish Christian you are. So, but talking about the church at Paul's time, I think this guy points out a lot of really very important things. And one of them is, what is the church? The church, he portrays, says, it's not the temple, it's not the synagogue, it's not the building. The people are the church. And he says, what then is the church? It is nothing but Israel, not a new Israel, but the one and only people of God. Israel is in a new phase of history, namely that of Jesus.
Father, what page are you on? So I can
This is page 31.
31.
Yes.
When the Christians were first birthed, they were meeting house to house,
Mhm.
but evidently they were still going to temple, right?
That's right.
But they would have their Bible studies off campus
Yeah.
in their own home.
Communion.
Huh?
And communion.
They commune.
And communion. Okay. Oh.
So,
But it was
But the early ones didn't have the Gospels in front of that because they were yet to be written.
well, they had
Old
the word of mouth.
They were in process of
Right.
gathering
And,
stories. I mean,
But that was okay in the communities.
yes.
People didn't
Well,
get
the
up
whole
in
thing
arms.
is, Jesus was a Jew to start out with.
Well, yes. And he ended as a Jew.
And some people don't remember that or consider it.
Jesus.
Oh yeah. Okay. Sure.
Born
Jesus.
Jew, doctor Jew.
At the
I thought
end
you
of
said Caesar.
oh, at the end of page 31, this guy writes, nearly all conversions in Acts take place in the synagogues. I mean, that's where Paul went to convert people.
Oh, I see.
And,
A field.
It says it is a shibboleth for understanding of an early Christian document's place in the history of primitive Christianity.
I was reading those vocabulary words you posted online. They're quite the mouthful.
Can you pronounce them?
No,
Yeah.
But I was kind of fascinated by this shibboleth. Shibboleth.
that sounds Jewish.
A shibboleth is a way to identify someone in a group. You know, if we had someone start coming to church and they kind of talk like this,
Yeah.
we'd know they're not from Kansas.
Yeah.
We'd know they're probably farther south of the Mason-Dixon line.
The shibboleth originally started in, it was in Judges, I think, because there was a group of people, Israelites, and they were fighting another group. And the first group could say shibboleth, the other group could only say sibboleth. So when they would want to cross the Jordan, they'd say shibboleth.
Yeah.
And if they said it right, they got across. If they said it wrong, they couldn't.
Oh.
Interesting.
Well, that's like during World War II. You know, when somebody would be captured, and if they want to know if they were American, they'd say, "Who won the last World Series?" and people would know. Now,
I wonder if Africa has been. I wonder if Africa has been slowed with all their nations and all of their languages. They're so diversified in their languages. No wonder they're tribal, because they don't know what everybody's saying, evidently.
well, China's the same
That could
way.
slow things down real fast if everybody, if you had 15 or 20 languages in a country.
Remember the stories of the early Christians,
Pinocchio and Tenzin.
how they would identify?
Yeah.
They'd be talking to someone. I didn't want to say, "What church do you go to?" They would take their foot, and in the sand they would draw the outline of a fish.
Yeah.
And then the other person would know, okay, you're in the club. You know, all organizations have some kind of shibboleth. You know, if you say to, when I was younger, if you said to someone, Dominus Vobiscum,
Oh, boy.
if they were Roman Catholic, they'd say Et tu spiritu tu.
Oh.
Dominus Vobiscum, the Lord be with you, and also with you. And there was another one, I found this when I looked this up in the dictionary, that I hadn't thought of, but it's really true. There is a road, a street in New York City that's spelled Houston, but it's not pronounced Houston. Houston. I don't know how they get Houston out of that, but if you're in New York and you say, "How do I get to Houston?"
I wouldn't know.
they know immediately
Yeah.
you're not a local.
Yeah. My science
I
teacher
imagine they
was
were
named
first. They were
Houston,
before the ones
spelled
down Texas.
Houston.
Yeah,
So it's not
Well, that's like-
anything unusual.
We say Arkansas, and across the line they say Arkansas.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, they think there's.
They
Now
have
the-
Arkansas River,
the
we
church-
have Arkansas River, it's all the same river.
Yeah.
Right.
It's our river.
The Catholic Church had its own language, which was Latin.
Yes.
And here they're preaching heaven down to people don't even know what's being said. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because
Well-
that's the way you have dominance over somebody, is you have them look up to you because you're so smart and intellectual. Man, you got it.
And
And
fraternities
I'll
and,
never be there.
fraternities and sororities have
Yeah.
a handshake that would identify.
Knock on the door or.
Yeah, when I joined the Elks in Pratt, the Elks have a greeting that they use. I can't share it with you because
Oh, yeah, secret.
even though I'm not an active member, I'm still a
The Masons do too.
yeah. I mean, all of these groups have
Less than
something that designates them.
Well, which, this is irrelevant probably, which one of those Elks, Masons, whatever, to join you have to ride a donkey backwards?
Oh my.
Yeah,
Must be
probably the
the
Shriners.
Yeah, I imagine that sounds like the Shriners. But there's a thing you gotta drink a 6-pack of beer and then ride a donkey backwards.
That's the Delta Gods.
Yeah, Delta Chi.
Hey,
But now it's a little scooter and the Masons instead of donkey.
Fraternity.
Yeah.
Most be.
That's because most Masons are of our age. They couldn't get up on a donkey. So, there was a shibboleth for the early Christians. And the Jews didn't know it. The Jewish Christians knew it. But this guy's trying to make a point is that there is, at this conversion, Jewish Christians, that when we are baptized, and I think he says it in here somewhere, that, what we're being baptized in is the faith of our fathers, which is a Jewish faith. What every Sunday school I've ever heard of teaches the 10 Commandments. Well, that's, if no smart-ass kid raises their hand and says, "Hey, but I'm a Christian, I don't follow those Jewish rules. I believe in God, and loving God and loving my neighbor." And we would say, no, you gotta learn the
Sit
Ten
in the
Commandments.
corner. Sit in the
Yeah,
corner.
sit in the corner.
Well, so way back when, we always are talking about the Jews and Christians and the Gentiles, I guess, the multiple gods.
Mhm.
But during that time, where do the Muslims and the Hindus and
Muslims
whatever
don't like-
Chinese religion?
The Muslims haven't even, Muhammad hasn't even been born at this
Okay.
time.
So we don't have to.
That comes in around 300, 350.
Okay, I didn't know.
The
I'd like
Hindus and the Hindus and Buddha, they're there before that.
Forever.
They
Yeah.
go back.
I'd like to know the life of Luther when he started writing that in an understandable way, where the people could read the Bible. It looks like he could have been shot by the church. He could have been.
Well, he was condemned by the church.
Well,
They
on
excommunicated
Facebook,
him.
they said they have a joke about how they
They
tried to kill the
excommunicated
guy that was going to write the Bible, try to put the Bible in English. Did you,
Oh, yeah.
did you
Okay.
post that?
Tina,
I think I may have.
And then they needed a printing press.
Yeah, until the printing press came along, it was. But in the Anglican tradition, the priest was the only person who had a prayer book. You know, in some churches they ring bells.
Yeah.
Well, and we ring them here, and those bells had a purpose. You know, when you had people packed into a cathedral, and the service was going to begin, and the celebrant and older party is coming out, nobody in the back could know.
No, and they're standing too.
Yes,
Oh,
there
really?
people are standing. So they ring the bell, and that says, shh,
Uh-huh.
we're getting ready to start the service. So, and when the gospel was read, there were no microphones. I mean, and they didn't yell out the gospel. They just read it. And nobody had a prayer book. Nobody had a Bible.
Wow.
So it was the pastor alone
Oral.
who had that. And there were, I think it was 5 books. Don't hold me to that. That could be wrong. But
5 or 7, I can't remember.
Yeah.
What it was.
but you know, there was the book for ordinations, the book for marriages, the books for funerals, the books for communion, the books for morning prayer and evening prayer. And
Books
these,
of Mass.
yeah, the missal, it was called the missal. And there was only one. I mean, there weren't on all the pews. And they didn't print them out on paper because they couldn't print.
They didn't have.
They
pews.
couldn't print a Bible, so there's no way they're going to duplicate.
Well, the people didn't necessarily read,
No,
No, they didn't. Most
except
of
the
them.
priests.
So what did Luther do with his Bible? Was that the Gutenberg?
No,
No.
he translated the Bible into German.
Right.
Gutenberg printed it, but he translated it
So the printing press was invented then.
yes.
just about the same time.
Okay.
Gutenberg had it. And then there were people translating it into English, into French. I mean, so, you know, it started traveling.
There's some, but in more recent times, but some group, I'm just going to say the Gideons or somebody, they don't just print English Bibles. Somebody prints Bibles
In
in
137 languages.
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
I have a good.
Oh,
Get in.
you do?
I have a Martin Luther German Bible.
Oh, my God, that's fabulous.
My grandfather and my great grandfather were German Lutherans, and I got their Bible.
Wow.
Oh,
I can bring it sometime.
Brand, read it to,
I'd
Brand,
love
read
to
us,
see
read
that.
us that.
yeah.
So then
The
there might be
German
some people that were bilingual
Mhm.
that could read Luther's Bible into. I bet that
German.
happened for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Could translate into another
Well, by the
language.
time Luther started, not long after Luther started translating the Bible into German, other countries started translating it into their language because that's how the Reformation spread. That was one of the big things. in the
Information.
Reformation. We want the
That's
Bible
what they
in our
were
own
like.
language.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder, you know, I believe everything you're saying, but it makes me wonder if somebody got some of that wrong.
Well, or just
Translation, you know.
misinterpreted, or maybe
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
like in Mexico. There's certain words we have in English they don't even have
Yeah.
in Spanish.
And Joss and Tittles too. This changes things up. pretty
Oh
good.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, all translations are flawed.
But like this translation is meant to kind of mess with the Bible.
Yeah.
Where
Well, and
the
all
early
trans-
ones were trying to get it exact.
Yeah.
all translations are interpretations
Yeah.
too.
Right.
That's true.
You know,
I
the
thought they were
the
trying.
King James Bible that so many people love
That's what we grew up with.
was translated for King James, who was an Anglican.
Mhm.
See, I think if a lot of these more biblically centered churches knew why the King James was translated, they'd go, ah. So,
No, go ahead.
no, that's it, go.
And the Torah, I mean, so it's like our basic text really is the Torah.
Yep, first 5 books of the Bible.
That is mind blowing to me.
And see
That's
those,
all- has
that's
translated
all
it.
that's in the Torah.
In 137 languages or whatever.
and the rest of those books in the Old Testament were kind of like Paul's letters.
Huh.
Because, you know, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, is sort of history. That's kind of like the book of Acts. But then you got Jeremiah, Isaiah, you know, all these are prophets, kind of like the letters that Paul wrote. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
identical, but I mean, they supplement the Torah.
Wow.
So, you know, that's why it's you got to be careful when you're trying to proof text
Oh, yeah.
an issue. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, and by that I mean, if you're not familiar, that's where you find one little passage that substantiates your argument, and you say, but the Bible says this.
Yeah, right.
Well,
But the Bible says this.
And you
over
can
here.
find the Bible on both sides of the subject.
Yeah.
That's right. I believe that.
Which is balance. Some people need to hear this side, and some people need to hear this side.
But if you're
When
on
you start
one
playing,
side, you
playing them
don't.
off against
worry
each other,
but the
that's
truth
the
is
problem.
usually in the middle.
When you start
Exactly.
playing off against
Oh, yeah, then you
each
get
side, then trouble.
denominations.
Yeah.
you-
Well, and during the Civil War, both sides were using the Bible to uphold their position.
Well, it's just like the Longest Day, the movie about World War II.
Uh-huh.
It showed Eisenhower, one of the American generals, saying, you know, I just have to wonder, is God on our side? And then it showed the German commander saying I wonder if God is on our side.
Yeah.
You know, they had Luther on their side, and that wasn't going to.
Exactly. That's a
Pardon?
good point. Like basketball teams.
Yeah.
You know, we pray that we're going to win, while the other team's praying that they're going to win.
Yeah.
How does God decide? I mean, He decided last night Hutch was going to.
Yeah.
You think he cares about a sporting event?
Don't you?
I'll
Nobody
tell you,
at this table goes to games like this one. Nobody.
when I was,
I'm always afraid to pray for my team to win because I feel like
Yeah.
that's just not how it's supposed to
Mr.
work.
when I was rector of an Episcopal church back in Michigan, we had a church softball
No
league,
end.
Oh,
and our team was horrible. I mean, we were 0-3, and we were playing the best team in the league,
Oh.
which was a Pentecostal church.
Oh.
And this guy, he had the opening prayer, I had the closing prayer. And his prayer went something like this: God, we ask that the best team win.
Uh-oh.
We have the best team win.
We won that game. And when I did the closing prayer, I said, dear God, thank you for letting the best team win. And that guy got
Was it
so
right?
That'll show him.
he got upset, and he came at me, and I said, hold it. You prayed that the best team win. I was giving thanks for a prayer that you answered.
Mysterious
Bet you
ways.
guys felt good that night.
Oh boy, I'll tell you. Well, I've always been a little bit on the edge, or a little bit crazy, as some people might say.
Oh, what was,
But
what did you call the Baptist church that,
Probably says.
Anabaptist.
The Anabaptists.
oh, that's a church I think that I was raised in, because I don't even remember them dedicating a baby during, of course, I was young.
Yeah, but
at the time.
Anabaptist is a term that covers a lot of people. It includes the Mennonites. They're Anabaptists.
Amish.
Oh, yeah. I think
Yeah,
so.
but they did, you were not baptized till
Right.
after you were up.
It's like,
Yeah, there are several churches who just don't believe in infant baptism.
Jewish.
And
That always makes me wonder. I really agree with what you're saying, but like when I went to church in Dodge City, there was a girl who had
Able to know
meningitis.
what you were
Well, what do you get when a mosquito bites you? Encephalitis. And she had the mind of a 1.5-year-old, died when she was 55. Well, she would have never reached the age of accountability.
Yeah.
The only word she could say was mom and daddy.
Well, the next special,
Pat said that the
Yes, but-
Pentateuch and the Torah are the same thing. Is she right?
yes.
There you go.
Well,
and I'm not quoting the Bible.
Pentateuch, Penta means 5.
Pentateuch, 5 books.
Yeah, but Torah, say,
Torah
it's
law.
just the cultural
Nobody
Jewish
should
law.
know that.
Yeah, that's what they call the Word of God. And and don't mistake that for Torah. The Japanese used that during World War II.
They spell it differently.
Yeah, it's spelled differently, but that's because Japanese uses those funny characters.
I took a class at the JUCO, some kind of history, and this coach taught it. And we had to sit and watch that movie,
Oh, my.
Torah, as part of our class. I thought,
That's good.
well, I've
Movies are
heard
great.
coaches showing movies a lot, but this is.
That's what you get when you have a coach teaching history.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And you
good.
get a lot of them.
I think our
Yeah.
Bible class has gone on vacation today.
Yeah.
A little fast.
Well, I want to kind of move through the rest of this.
Well, I'm learning a lot.
I do too.
He says here, the idea of a new Israel of Jews and Gentiles is an inconceivable thing to Paul, and this idea is nowhere to be found in the New Testament. A Gentile can never be seen as an Israelite in Luke's eyes. He never addresses Gentile Christians as the sons of Israel, Israelites, children of Abraham, true Jews. Luke speaks of the divided people of God, and so he is capable of carrying his comprehension of God's never-ending faithfulness. The basis for Luke's idea is a mass conversion among Jews and half-Jews, the God-fearers. There is not a single report of a mass conversion of pure Gentiles, that is, people outside the synagogues. That Jews, there were Gentiles who were converted, but there were Jews that were converted. And a lot of Gentiles went to synagogue. I mean, what did Gentiles have? Well, they build a fire and sacrifice to a god. At least when the Jews were doing it, there was some rhyme and reason for doing it.
So, but they didn't, the Gentiles didn't go to synagogue until they were converted to Christianity?
No, a lot of them went before.
Went before.
Yeah.
Got it.
Were the
And
Galatians sacrificing when Paul came down on them?
Mhm.
So that kind of blurs the line, doesn't it?
yeah, and says, what kind of people belong to the church? Namely, people from the synagogue, Jews and God-fearers. And that Israel is a divided people, an idea already present in Luke chapter 2, verse 34, and ending up with many thousand of Jewish converts in Acts 21:20, that we're going to get to today, but we'll probably get to next week. Thus, Luke has no difficulty in demonstrating the fulfillment of the promise. He has not been forced into the kind of problematical operation known from later times, that the promises were fulfilled, but not among the people for whom they were meant. Salvation comes to the chosen people and the hope that Jesus would liberate Israel was not a false one. The promises belong ever to the people and are hereditary. The Christian Jews are the sons of Israel, of Abraham, and of the prophets. So, and we've had that term Christian Jews in Acts already, where they were talking about. So
That means they were first Jews.
no, that they not Jews in the
Cultural.
cultural. Yeah, I mean they're
I understand when they become Christians, they gather at a synagogue.
right.
I just wondered.
I think it may be like we can go to a Roman Catholic church, we just can't take communion, so we don't have all of the. But there are churches like the Episcopal Church and the ELCA. You can go to the service and take communion.
Right.
And there's always a belief that just because you went to church and they're having communion, you have to take communion.
Mhm.
It's that those of you who are in love and charity with your neighbor draw near to this altar. If you don't take communion, it doesn't mean you're bad. I think a lot of people think, if I don't take communion, people are going to wonder what in the hell I've been up
whenever you
to.
do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I told the church one time, I said, you keep saying that the people are biblically illiterate. I know how to straighten it out a little bit. How's that? Don't take communion every week. It takes a long time. You're limiting your preacher to 10 minutes, and you're lavishly taking communion every week. Boy, that went over like
Yeah,
Well, come on over to Grace.
oh dear.
So, and he gets talking about Israel as the church, and we really have run across in the book of Acts so far. Luke gives us the most Jewish Messiah within the New Testament. Luke does not talk about the church as a new institution or organization, but simply as the people. Salvation depends upon the promises given to and belonging to the people. Luke has a very conservative theology of law, not a measure of salvation, but as a mark of the church's legitimacy as Israel. It's binding on Christian Jews as well as Gentiles. And Paul is the law-abiding Pharisee, serving as a missionary to the Jews. And we usually refer to Paul as the apostle to the Gentiles. And this guy's saying, not necessarily. He doesn't talk about that until some of his letters. But in the book of Acts, it's never mentioned that Paul is the missionary to the Gentiles. This guy says Paul is the law-abiding Pharisee serving the mission to the Jews.
Wow, I'm getting
I thought in Acts they talk about, they eventually reached the conclusion that Peter was to the Jews and Paul was to the Gentiles.
But Paul was to the God-fearing Jews. And I think maybe part of that is when we look at, Peter, when he started off, was a good Jew, and everybody else had to be a good Jew. Peter was the one who said, men, you've got to become a Jew first. And men, that means it's going to hurt. But Paul says, you can be grafted into the church. I think somewhere, and I'm not sure where it is, but Paul talks about a circumcision of the heart.
Yes, yeah.
And that you don't have to go through a Jewish ritual. You just have to have in your heart the love of God. And, he doesn't have the dietary, Peter had those dietary rules. And remember, he got called on the carpet for that. Somebody said, hey, you were out of town, and
He had the vision. He had a vision from God of
the sheep coming
God
down.
saying, everything is kosher.
And he's using that as an excuse, and what do the people say? Come on, Peter, make up a better story than that. I mean, they weren't buying it. Peter realized that all food is from God. And
Peter did.
Peter.
Mhm.
And so he kind of toned down that Jewish commitment. You had to be a Jew first and then a Christian. And Paul said, you know, you can be a Christian, but you can be a Jewish Christian. Because, you know, Paul never says, forget the law. In all of his epistles, he says the law was given for good. You still have to follow the law. Just know, no matter how hard you try, you cannot follow the law.
Didn't Jesus say that something about he did not come to do away with the law?
Yeah.
But to fulfill it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, where you've got these early Christians in Paul's view, you've got people who are saying, you know, I've got to follow the law. But the law I've got to follow most carefully is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the whole 10 Commandments reduced into
Right.
2.
Well, so a good Jewish person would be believing those two anyway.
Mhm.
So they don't have to add that in to being a Christian. They
No.
just they keep everything they've got and they just add Jesus Christ because they're all
Love your neighbor, not come
looking for the Messiah.
Yeah.
Now they were reading the letters. They weren't handing them out like this, isn't that right? They just read them.
Yes.
And you heard them.
Yep.
And then you lived with them, and that was it.
That's
Boy, I
right.
can see why those letters were so necessary to correct this big explosion that was going on, Judaism from Christianity, and the marriage where it marries and where it doesn't.
You know, it's no different. The church then is no different than the church today.
Who already knows what's like
I mean,
Christian, you follow.
every denomination has their own little quirks. And those little quirks are not what gets you closer to God. A lot of times it separates you from God.
Like how deep's the water at Baptist?
predestined.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
when you're supposed to be good to
It's
your
predestined to be
Start
right.
with 3 feet.
there's sort of
You didn't
friction
hear
a lot of
that, but
times
yeah,
with
That's a
people
good point.
because they get little tiffs over the denomination
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
So
Chuck, as you say, how deep should the water be in the pool? Do you sprinkle? Do you immerse? Does it make a difference? It shouldn't.
I was reading some other piece of literature, and it was nonfiction. But they said in the early Episcopal Church there was immersion
Mhm.
as a choice. Never hear about it now.
Well, my
I just didn't know that.
You're too classy to have gone under.
I got to see the Baptist dunk tank in
my
Salina.
my
Lunch together on
my home parish, St. John's, Plymouth. A few years ago, they remodeled the church, and in the narthex, they put a fountain, you know, with running water, and they were using that to baptize infants.
Oh.
They wouldn't immerse, you know, not up to their neck.
No, but more than just.
Yeah, more than just sprinkling. But it's not how you're baptized, but that you're baptized.
Yeah, that's right.
That's important.
That's a good
That's a
statement.
good thing.
Yeah.
And so, well, anyway, let me ask you guys: is this helpful to?
Yes.
Well, you know what? I think now I can go home and read it. But to me, if I started reading it, I thought, I don't even know what's going on.
But the other thing is, Christianity changed after Luke wrote this.
Yes.
I mean, over the next generation.
Yeah, and this guy points out that Paul was in the 3rd generation.
Uh-huh.
And so, you know, a lot of the stuff that he's talking about in that 3rd generation is from the first and second generation, stuff that he heard. But it changes. Every generation there's a change. And like it or not, we got to live with the change. So, all right. What were we going to read today?
Chapter 20.
Chapter 20.